Now, in this particular video, I will be going over some extremely important definitions when we are talking about the topic of inheritance. If you have studied the chapter of inheritance in O levels or your IGCSEs, and you're familiar with the terms genes, alleles, genotype, phenotypes, dominant alleles, recessive alleles, and codominant alleles, you may skip this video. But if you would like a refresher or you have not studied this chapter before in your O levels or your IGCSEs, then or if you have completely forgotten about this, then this might serve as a reminder and also a revision for you. So right off the bat, what we are going to be doing is we are going to be talking about the definition of genes and alleles for this part, for the first part. Now, as you can see here, I'm just drawing out a chromatid, all right, and I'm putting a single red line over there, which represents the gene, and the gene has a specific position in the chromatid, okay? But if I wanted to draw the chromosome in its uncoiled or chromatin form, you can see the double helix over there. That's where the gene is located in the DNA or the chromosome. So as a reminder, the chromosome can exist in two forms, the chromatid form or the chromatin form, depending on the stage of the cell cycle. You don't need to know that in detail, but like I've told you before in the previous videos, I will represent the chromosomes in their chromatid or their coiled and condensed form because it's easier that way, right? So the gene, by definition, we've studied this in chapter 6 of AS. The gene is a length of DNA that codes for a polypeptide or a polypeptide chain. How does it code for the polypeptide? Because, again, a revision. The gene undergoes transcription to produce the mRNA. The mRNA undergoes translation where it produces a polypeptide or a protein. And depending on the type of protein you produce, it affects your characteristics. So let's look at an example. I don't need you to memorize this example, but I have a gene here that affects the fur color of a particular animal. Now, that gene will undergo transcription to produce the mRNA, translation to produce the enzyme, which is a polypeptide, by the way. Remember, it codes for the polypeptide. Now, I don't need you to memorize this, but what I want you to see is that polypeptide will be able to take a substrate, and the substrate is able to bind to its active site, and when it produces a product, the product is a brown pigment. Again, don't memorize this. But as you can see here, because it produces the brown pigments in the fur, the color of the organism is brown. There you go. That is a brown color, isn't it? Yeah, it does look brown. Anyway, so that's how the gene affects characteristics, where the gene undergoes transcription translation to produce a polypeptide, and in this case, the polypeptide is an enzyme, and the enzyme is able to synthesize brown pigments in the animal. Thus, the animal becomes a brown color. Now, some students will say, do all genes code for enzymes? Not necessarily. Some genes code for hormones, some genes code for neurotransmitters, but all genes will code for different types of polypeptides, and depending on the type of polypeptide you produce, it affects different characteristics. Now, that out of the way, what is the meaning of alleles then? A lot of times, students understand the concept of a gene, but then when it comes to alleles, it becomes a little bit odd. So what I want you to understand about alleles is, alleles are varieties of the gene. By just mentioning the word varieties of the gene, some students will be like, still don't understand that? Okay, could you please elaborate that further? Another way of looking at the allele is different versions of one gene. If you still don't understand that, don't worry, because that's why I'm here. So let's take the gene that affects fur color. Now, the gene that affects fur color over here, I'm just focusing on a particular base sequence over there, and I'm just putting it there as AT, CG, and CG. That's just part of the gene, by the way. I'm not drawing out the whole length of the gene because it's too long. So I'm just going to focus on that particular 3 base pairs, as you can see in that gene. Now, this gene undergoes transcription and translation. It is able to code for the enzyme, and the enzyme is able to function and produce the brown pigments in the animals. We've seen this earlier. But let's take another example here. At the bottom here, I'm also going to draw out one gene that affects fur color. The only difference here is the base sequence. The base sequence is just slightly different. So as you can see, here is AT, AT, and CG, right? So I'm putting it as blue in color just to show you that it's different. So you see, both the genes at the top and the bottom, they both affect fur color. That's why it's called one gene. But are both of these genes exactly the same? No, they are not, because the base sequence is slightly different. And because the base sequence is slightly different, it is just the different version of one gene. The reason why they are different versions is because the base sequence between the gene at the top and the gene at the bottom is just slightly different. Therefore, if this gene, for example, undergoes transcription and translation, it may produce the polypeptide. But remember, when we studied this in chapter 6, because the base sequence of the gene is different, the codons of the mRNA might be different. And because the codons of the mRNA might be different, it may affect the structure of the proteins. It might affect the primary, secondary, and tertiary structure of the protein. So look at the shape of the protein or the enzyme here. Is it able to bind to the substrate and form the ES complex? No, and therefore it will not be able to synthesize the brown pigments. And in this case over here, the organism will not have brown pigments, therefore the organism will be white in color. So the point I'm just trying to make here is both the gene at the top and the gene at the bottom both affect fur color. The only difference is the gene at the top makes the fur color brown and the gene at the bottom will make the fur color white. That's why it's called different versions of one gene. Because the one gene is the gene for fur color, there are two different versions. One that makes it brown color and one that makes it white color. So that's the meaning of alleles, by the way, that I want you to understand. And in order to just simplify this whole thing, we can just basically put it like this, okay? The gene that affects the fur color. Now, writing out the base sequences can be a bit of a hassle because you have to write out ATCGCG for the top one and ATATCG for the bottom one, and base sequences in genes can be extremely long as well. So in order to save time, what scientists will do is scientists will just represent the gene at the top with alphabets. We will use a capital B alphabet for the one at the top as an example and a small b alphabet for the one at the bottom. So to simplify this, instead of writing it as gene with the base sequence and whatever, we just draw out the chromosomes and we just draw out the line and we just put capital B over there and small b over there at the bottom. And if the organism has the capital B allele or the capital B information, it will make the organism have brown fur. And if the organism has the small b allele, they will just have white fur. Now, some students will then ask, why is one alphabet large and one alphabet small? I will explain all that later. There is a reason for that. But we usually represent alleles with simple alphabets or symbols. The alphabets just serve as a symbol. They don't mean anything inherent, okay? You can use capital T, small t. You can use capital Q, small q. It really depends on what the exam gives you as the symbol, right? It's not fixed. All right, so I don't need you to memorize that, oh, brown fur is large b and white fur is small b. That's ridiculous because different organisms will have different types of genes which will affect their characteristics differently. So it doesn't matter. Now, again, as a reminder, the large B allele and the small b alleles are both genes for fur color, but they just affect the organisms differently. That's what we have to know, and that's the meaning of alleles. Right. As an example here, let's take another one here, okay? If you still don't understand the genes and alleles, I want you to see this. I'm just drawing it out again. The gene that affects the body color, and I'm putting in the base sequence. I know it's too small. I don't need you to memorize the base sequence. But if you can see there at the top, it's ATCGCGGCTATAAT. Okay, don't have to memorize that. Now, when it undergoes transcription and translation, it codes for a polypeptide and it produces a blue pigment. And for example, this blue pigment, because the gene affects body color, this blue pigment, what does it do? It makes the organism become blue in color. Now, as an example, I'm putting another gene for body color at the bottom there, but I'm just zooming in. You can see the base sequence, and I'm just changing the base sequence slightly. So in this case over here, from GC, I'm going to put it as AT. So this gene, it also affects the body color, but the base sequence is slightly different. Therefore, for example, when this one undergoes transcription and translation, it produces red pigments, and the red pigments will affect the characteristic of the organism to make it red. Now, writing out the entire base sequence can be a hassle. No one has time to write out the entire base sequence, right? So to keep life simple for ourselves, we will represent the top, for example, as the capital B allele and the bottom one over here as the small b allele. That's basically what alleles are all about. We use alphabets or symbols to represent the alleles. Again, why are some letters large or uppercase letters and why are some letters small or lowercase letters? I'm going to explain that in the next part. Same video, by the way, so just hang on there. But before we talk about all that, I want to go through the basics of inheritance, and there are a few important definitions that you need to be able to understand when we are talking about inheritance. This is not up for negotiation. You need to know what all these terms mean, right? Because Chapter 16 questions will immediately ask you things like genotype, what's the phenotype, what's the dominant allele, recessive allele, what is codominance, what does homozygous mean, what does heterozygous mean. We need to know these in detail. So if you understand all these terms, you can skip this video, but if you still need to go through it as a refresher, then let's dive right into it. So we have an organism over here, and this organism, like I've told you before in the previous video, they usually have like a homologous pair. How do we know it's a homologous pair? They have the chromosomes are of the same length, and they also have same types of genes at the same position, represented in those single purple lines. If you can't see the purple lines because you're colorblind, I'm just putting a circle there. Those are the two lines right there. So those are the homologous chromosomes, and those genes represent body color genes, right? Now, the body color gene as an example, this is my example. You don't need to memorize my examples. I need you to understand that because different, like I said, they can throw any different types of examples in the exam. So for my example here, the body color gene has two alleles, where capital B allele, that specific base sequence, will give you blue color of the organism, and the small b allele with a slightly different base sequence will make the organism become red in color. Now remember, this organism over here has two chromosomes, and each chromosome carries a body color gene. So if a question asks you what's the genotype of the organism, the genotype of the organism just represents the alleles present in the organism. What are the possible alphabets or alleles that the organism might have? The organism can have one allele which is large B and the other allele which is also large B as well. This organism over here has a genotype of large B, large B. That's it. An easier way of looking at this is to just imagine that when they ask for genotype, they just want the alphabets. That's all we have to understand. It's not the best way to explain it, but yeah, they just want to know what alphabets or what alleles the organism has. So this organism over here has large B as a genotype. Let's try another possibility. Another possibility over here for this organism, it may have a small b allele on one chromosome and small b allele on the other chromosome as well for the body color gene. So the genotype is small b, simple as that. Okay, why does the genotype have two alleles? Because it has two chromosomes that have the body color genes. And of course, phenotype by definition is just the observable features that you can see in the organism based on the genotype and based on the environment. But phenotype is just what you see. So if this organism over here has one large B allele which makes it blue and another large B allele that makes it blue, Obviously, this organism is going to be blue in color. Duh, that's the only information it has. So phenotype just means blue organism. For the organism on the right over here, it has one small b allele that makes it red and another small b allele that makes it red. The genotype is small b, small b. Therefore, what color is this organism going to be? Obviously, this organism is going to be red in color. That's as easy as it gets, because those are the only information they carry. Those are the only alleles they carry. So this is what we have to understand about genotype and phenotype. So I hope you understand that. Now, why are some letters large or uppercase letters and why are some letters small or lowercase letters? Let's talk about dominant and recessive alleles. As a reminder for you, let's look at this organism here again. If the organism has you can see the two chromosomes and the body color genes, okay, represented by the two lines. If one allele is large B and the other allele is large B, obviously the phenotype of the organism is blue. It's as easy as that. And if the organism has one small b allele and another small b allele, that's when the organism will be red in color. We understand that too. That's quite easy. But here's the thing. What happens if the organism has one large B allele on one chromosome and another small B allele on the other chromosome? So here's where it becomes odd. So when I ask my students, especially if it's their first time learning genetics, most of my students will be like, they'll give me various answers. They'll be like, maybe it's bluish and red. Maybe it's reddish and blue. Maybe it's purple because it's a mixture. Now, based on this example over here that I've given you, the genotype of this organism is large b, small b, but the phenotype of this organism over here is actually going to be blue. Now, why is that so? The reason is because the blue allele is the dominant allele. So what does it mean by the dominant allele? The dominant allele means that the allele that is always expressed if it's present in the genotype. So look at this organism. It has one large B allele and one small b allele. The large B allele is present. It is there. You can see it over there. Therefore, it is automatically expressed over the recessive allele. Now, some students may ask the question, why does that happen? We don't have to go into the detail of that. Okay, you just need to understand that dominant alleles are represented with uppercase alphabets, and the moment they are present in genotype, they are automatically expressed no matter what. So, for example, if you have a large B allele, it will automatically, it's blue. If it's small b, both of them will express red, right? But when you have a large B and small b, the small b allele is trying to exert its effect, but it can't because the large B allele overpowers it, and therefore it makes the organism become blue in color. That's what we have to understand for this. So by definition, the small b allele is always referred to as the recessive allele, the allele that is only expressed when the dominant alleles are absent. Okay, so as an example here, see, the only way the organism can be red is if both the alleles on the left and right are small b and small b. Because there's no dominant allele, the genotype becomes small b, and therefore the phenotype is red in this case. Now, some students will ask me the question, can I say that the dominant allele is the stronger allele and the recessive allele is the weaker allele? Even though it kind of implies that this is the definition, I would recommend that you don't do that. It does not necessarily mean that dominant alleles give you stronger characteristics and recessive allele gives you weaker characteristics. So we avoid using the word stronger and weaker in this situation. Okay, so dominant alleles are always represented using uppercase alphabets and recessive alleles are using the same alphabet but just lowercase. So that's what I want you to know about dominance and recessive. In this example here, in pea plants, there are two alleles for height. They say tall is large T allele, dwarf is small t allele. So if I say that the genotype is large T, automatically large T or capital T is tall, or big T is tall. Big T is dominant. So therefore, in this case, the organism is going to be tall. if the genotype is small t, the organism is obviously going to be a dwarf because there are no dominant alleles present, only the recessive allele is expressed in this case. But if the organism's genotype is large T, small t, in this case, what will actually happen is we will have to say that because dominant allele is present, the dominant allele is expressed, and automatically it makes the organism tall. That is another example right there. This is an example from a past paper question, but I just took out just part of it. So that's what we have to understand for this. Now, another example over here is something called codominance. All right. Before we talk about codominance, I'm going to give you a slightly different example. Don't memorize this, but it helps. Now, for codominance over here, you see the organism, homologous chromosomes, body color gene, everything is fine. But the body color gene here has two different types of alleles, where I represent the allele as CR allele and CY allele. Now, some students get a little bit confused with that CR. The CR is just a symbol. Remember, it represents the base sequence. The C to the power of R do not represent any power. It's not mathematics, okay? So it's just a symbol. The CR allele is going to make the organism be red in color, and the CY allele will be yellow in color. So we have an otter over there, okay? So what will the color of the otter be if it's CR alleles which are present in the genotype? So the genotype is CR, automatically the otter is red in color. There are no red otters, but yeah, anyway, you get my point. So this is the first part. Now, what if the allele is CY and the genotype is CY, and in this case over here the otter will be yellow? But here's where it becomes very interesting. What if the otter has two different alleles where it's CR and CY? You might be thinking, oh, which is the uppercase letter? Which is the large alphabet? You look at the R is a large alphabet or uppercase alphabet, and the Y is also an uppercase alphabet as well. So both alleles will have equal dominance in this case. That means both alleles can show or can be expressed. Therefore, in this kind of situation, depending on the question, the otter will probably have red and yellow fur at the same time. Both alleles are expressed. This is what is known as codominance, where two different alleles affect the phenotype at the same time. In the case of dominant and recessive, when you have two different alleles, only the dominant one affects it over the recessive, right? But in the case of codominance, the two different alleles are both equally expressed in the phenotype. So you have to pay attention to how the questions are going to be asked in the exam. For the example about codominance right here, I've also taken this one out of from a past paper, and they've mentioned it. The coat color in cows, is inherited in a very similar way to blood groups in humans. The gene for coat color has two codominant alleles. So right off the bat, they have mentioned it to you that it's two codominant alleles, and I've also written it down here. And just give me a moment to draw out my cow. Okay, so you have the cow. CB is the allele for the brown coat, and CW is the allele for the white coat that was mentioned in the question. So table 2.1 shows the genotypes and phenotypes for the coat color seen in the herd of cattle. So if the cow has a genotype, as you can see here, the cow has two chromosomes, and if both chromosomes carry the alleles CB, obviously that's the genotype, and the phenotype of the cow will be brown. That's mentioned in the table as well. But if it's CW, the cow will be white. It's also mentioned in the table. But in this case, if the cow has one allele CB and another allele which is CW, they have stated it there that it's codominant. So in this case, we have to know, or we have to understand that the two different alleles are equally expressed in the phenotype, and based on this table, it is mentioned that the cow will have a roan coat. What exactly is a roan coat? A roan coat just basically means it's a mixture of brown and white. That's what you just have to understand. So if a question asks you what's the phenotype for this, based on the table, it is just roan. Now, What I want to also show you is another type of example in A levels. This one is going to be a little bit confusing. This one over here, a gene for feather color in chickens is located on an autosome. Do not worry about the meaning of the autosome. I will explain that much later. All right. And the gene has two alleles where black is CB, splash white is CS. Just drawing out the chicken over here, and I'm drawing out its two chromosomes. And on these chromosomes over here, for example, the lines represent the gene that affects the feather color. And if the chicken has a genotype of CB, the chicken will be black in color. That's the phenotype of the chicken. And if the chicken is CS, it is splashed white. So far, so good. Now, they've given you a clue down there. I know I've not talked about monohybrid inheritance. I've not talked about the inheritance of chromosomes in detail, but I did mention it before that when parents reproduce, parents will pass down half the number of chromosomes to the offspring. So when you look at this question here, it says that when a chicken with black feather is mated with a chicken with splashed white feather, so let's look at the chickens. The black chicken will pass down one chromosome, because it's half, so it passes down the chromosome with CB, and the splash white chicken will pass down a chromosome in its gamete with CS. Therefore, when they form the offspring will have one chromosome which contains the CB allele, one chromosome that contains the CS allele. Okay? And so, in this case, the offspring has two different alleles, doesn't it? And they have also implied the phenotype here. All the offsprings will have blue feathers. So in this case, when CB and CS are both expressed together, it becomes a new phenotype, which is blue. Some students will ask me the question, wait, shouldn't it be gray or shouldn't it be black and white at the same time? No, it really depends on what the question gives you. So follow what the question says. Understood? So they have actually given you the clue here to say that if the offspring has one CB allele and one CS allele in its genotype, the phenotype will be blue. This is another example of codominance as well. Now, the last one that we just have to look at is something called homozygous and heterozygous. Homozygous just means same alleles in the genotype. Heterozygous just means different alleles in the genotype. So for example, homozygous is large b, and also small b. Heterozygous is different alleles, so it's large b, small b. As long as the two alphabets, one is large and small, that's considered heterozygous because those two represent different base sequences. So therefore, they are different alleles, no matter what. So I need you to understand all these definitions in detail when we are talking about this part of the chapter. So let's look at another example. So as you can see this example here, Gregor Mendel studied inheritance in the garden P sativum. The flowers of P sativum that he studied were either purple or white. So these are observable characteristics. It's either purple or white, so these are phenotypes. The gene that controls flower color has two alleles, large B. You see, the moment you see the alphabet large B, so you see in this example here, they are giving you the alphabets. So you have to follow the alphabets that they give you. Okay? You cannot just simply, you know what, I want to use my own alphabets. No. If they've given you a specific set of symbols to use those symbols. Sometimes in the exam, they may say, use your own symbols, but for now, no. So large B is the dominant allele. We know that because it's uppercase or large alphabet. A large alphabet. Small b is the recessive allele. Now, the large B allele makes it into a purple flower, and small b allele makes it into a white flower. And they've actually mentioned it down there. The dominant trait is purple. So what is the recessive allele? The recessive allele is the alphabet that is the recessive. So therefore, you just have to put small b. Simple as that. Can you put a phenotype? An example of a phenotype can be just the purple flower or white flower. That's good enough. Homozygous genotype. What does it mean by homozygous? Both the alleles are the same. It can be large b, or small b. Heterozygous genotype, large b, small b, because there are two different alleles at the same time in the genotype. So If the organism is large B, obviously the dominant allele is expressed and it's going to be purple flower. If it's small b, obviously there are no dominant alleles, there are only recessive alleles, it will be a white flower. And if it's large b or heterozygous, in this case, the dominant allele is able to exert its effect over the recessive allele. That's why the phenotype of the organism is going to be purple. So this is a review, an almost 30-minute review on on the basics of inheritance. And you need to know these terms in detail, by the way, because when I'm going to talk about A-level inheritance, I'm just going to use these terms interchangeably. So I hope you understand these keywords, the definition of these keywords when we are doing this chapter.